Vitamin C plays an important role in keeping us healthy. Most mammals produce it in their livers, so they never suffer from a lack of it. Curiously, however, some mammals, such as humans and apes, cannot do so. What happens when you lack this important vitamin? You might see black and blue marks on your skin. Your teeth could suffer too. The pink area around them might become soft and bleed easily. These are just a couple of good reasons to eat plenty of fresh fruit. The word drug means anything that, even in small amounts, produces changes in the body, the mind, or both. This definition, however, does not clearly separate drugs from what we usually think of as food. The difference between a drug and a poison is also unclear. All drugs become poisons in large amounts, and many poisons are useful drugs in carefully controlled amounts. Is alcohol, for instance, a food, a drug, or a poison? It can be any of the three, depending on how we use it. Green tea has a long history in Japan and strong ties with Japanese culture. Because of this, one might think that green tea comes from a plant unique to Japan. However, all tea, no matter what its color or taste, comes from the same plant. Then, what causes the differences in taste and color? They are in fact the result of different ways of growing the tea and treating it after it is picked. Wolves have an interesting way of raising their young. When a female wolf is ready to give birth, she digs a hole. Within this hole, she has her babies. While she is taking care of these babies, other wolves bring her food. After they get a little older, the mother can leave them while she goes off to hunt with other members of the group. Then, instead of the mother, another female will stay behind to guard the young wolves. Physical gestures may have different meanings in different cultures, and misunderstanding these signals can sometimes be embarrassing. I once had an experience which I have never forgotten. Some years ago, I took a small group of foreign students to Kyoto. I counted them with the index finger, which is counted in Japan, but one of them became quiet and looked puzzled. When I asked him what was the matter, he replied, "In my country, we count people with our eyes. We use our fingers to count pigs." The smile may no longer be an effective way to mask one's true feelings. Some psychologists have claimed that true smiles and false smiles use different muscles. For example, in the true smile, the muscles surrounding the eyes tighten, while the cheek muscles pull the corners of the lips upward. On the other hand, in the false smile, the muscles between the eyebrows move slightly, while the muscles around the mouth pull the corners of the lips downward. If the psychologist's claim is proven to be true, perhaps people will worry less about what they say and more about which muscles to use when they smile. When English-speaking people talk about hot food, are they saying the food is spicy like curry? Or are they talking about its temperature as in hot food? These two different meanings of hot may seem confusing to Japanese students, but as a matter of fact, the word is the right one for describing the way the body responds to spice and heat. A simple explanation would go something like this. When we eat or drink, the same nerves in the mouth react both to spicy chemicals in the food and to a rise in temperature. The English expression therefore reflects this fact about the human body. Western clothes have buttons on the right for men. This is convenient because the majority of men are right-handed. It is easier for them to use the right hand when buttoning up. Why then do women's clothes have buttons on the left, even though most women are also right-handed? Is this a kind of discrimination? In fact, there is a reason why women's buttons are on that side. In the past, buttons were quite expensive and only very rich people could afford them. Women in such wealthy families had servants who dressed them. Therefore, to make it easier for the servants, buttons were put on the left. The color purple has often been regarded as a symbol of wealth and power, but the dye used to produce it did not have an elegant beginning. An ancient people living along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea first discovered how to make the dye from murex snails, small sea animals with hard shells. Unlike the snails, murex snails give off a strong-smelling liquid that changes color when it comes into contact with air and light. From this liquid, the people produced the purple dye. If we visit the places where the dye was produced, we might still be able to see the shells of murex snails. Let us hope we cannot smell them. In August of 1771, Joseph Priestley put a small branch of mint in the transparent closed space with a candle that burned out the air until it soon went out. After 27 days, he lit the extinguished candle again, and it burned perfectly well in the air that previously would not support it. So Priestley proved that plants somehow change the composition of the air. In another celebrated experiment from 1772, Priestley kept a mouse in a jar of air until it collapsed. He found that a mouse kept with a plant would survive. These kinds of observations led Priestley to offer an interesting theory that plants restore to the air whatever breathing animals and burning candles remove, what was later coined by Lavoisier, oxygen. When she was 26 years old, Agatha Christie left home one foggy night and disappeared. The next morning, her car was found halfway down a grassy bank. Halfway down a grassy bank. Grassy bank. Grassy bank with its wood stuck in the bushes. The police found her fur coat in the car, but there was no sign of her. But they suspected was attempted suicide because her marriage was seriously troubled at the time. And despite the extensive police search of the whole area, there were no clues to her whereabouts. But then, 11 days after her disappearance, the head waiter at the hotel in North Yorkshire noticed that one of the female guests looked similar to the newspaper photos of the missing novelist. He rang the police and her husband rushed to see her. To his surprise, however, Agatha acted like a completely different person and didn't seem to recognize her husband. He thought she had suffered a memory loss due to stress. In fact, it was a distressful incident for Agatha. It was followed by their divorce. But ironically, the incident made her a best-selling novelist. Her next novel, The Big Four, sold 9,000 copies, more than twice as many as any of her previous books. Have you ever thought about what skin does for us? Most of us are aware that skin protects us from liquid, heat, cold, dirt, and bacteria. But that is not its only job. For instance, the skin is where our bodies make the vitamin D that we need. Another function has to do with the sense of touch. Without that sense, we could not feel any difference between rough and smooth surfaces. Skin can even help us determine if someone is sick. The wrong color, slightly gray or very pale, may be a sign of disease. Skin may reflect a person's mental state too. Unusual sweating, for example, may be a sign that the person is nervous or under stress. Genes, the basic parts of cells which are passed down from parents to children. may have something to do with human behavior. In an experiment, scientists put flies into a glass tube and placed a light at the end of it. Some of the flies began flying toward the light, some began walking, and some did not move at all. On the basis of the flies' actions, they were separated into different groups: flies that love light, flies that like light, and flies that like the dark. The researchers found that these three groups of flies had variations in a particular set of genes. This suggested to the researchers that the variations in these genes might explain differences in the flies' behaviors. If genes influence behaviors in flies, why not in humans too? There are many benefits of reading books aloud to young children. First, reading aloud is a wonderful opportunity for parents to spend time in close contact with their children. After a busy day, reading a book can be a relaxing way for a family to slow down and communicate. Another important feature of reading aloud is that many books have thoughtful ideas or moral messages. Parents and children can explore these concepts together. In addition, listening to stories helps the child learn vocabulary and sentence structure. Moreover, some researchers believe that reading aloud to a child actually stimulates learning and benefits brain development. Studies have shown that children do better in school when their parents have read to them frequently. Psychologists, doctors, teachers, and librarians encourage parents to read aloud on a regular basis to assist the development of the child and build strong family relationships. Every day, millions of people in offices, supermarkets, and factories worldwide hear background music. For most background music, the soundtracks have been carefully selected to change human behavior. According to research, fast music will not change human behavior as much as slow music. Slow music, for instance, will make customers shop more slowly. The longer they shop in a store, the more they will buy. Background music has also been used with great success in many factories. Fast music does not make employees work faster, as some had expected, nor does slow music make them work slower. The main effect of background music is that it reduces work-related stress and helps employees stay interested in their work. This necessarily reduces on-the-job accidents and saves companies money. Next time you hear background music, listen carefully and try to guess which of your behaviors it is trying to change. Chances are that you too are somehow being influenced by background music. A zoo in Nagano Prefecture will start a 24-hour web service showing zoo animals. The service, called the Digital Animal Park, will allow people to watch the animals' night activities. It is the first time in Japan for a zoo to start such a web service. 15 cameras will be installed in the zoo, and 12 kinds of animals, including a Bengal tiger, a black bear, and a kangaroo, will be shown on the web. They were selected by the zookeepers because of their interesting behavior and popularity among visitors. Zoo officials said they hoped that viewers would soon be able to see Humboldt penguins laying eggs, an activity that usually occurs at night. Pictures of each of the animals are also available on the website, and zoo officials hope that images of the animals will be used in science classes at school. I hope interest in the animals will grow and more people will visit the zoo. We also want to discuss new roles for zoos, like education and environmental protection, a zoo official said. Have you ever noticed different approaches people use to deal with problems? Some people, individualists, generally try to work through problems on their own. Other people, cooperators, tend to approach problem solving as a group matter. Each approach has positive and negative points. Individualists may often be the quickest to find an answer to a problem, and they tend to be willing to take responsibility. However, this approach is not perfect. They may be too committed to a particular position to be able to change their opinions. In this way, the individualist approach may result in difficulties later. Cooperators are valued as team members in sports or school or work. They tend to be flexible enough to recognize the importance of other points of view when problems arise. This approach, however, can take a long time, which may lead to delays in solving problems. Such difficulties sometimes cannot be avoided with the cooperator's approach. We should learn to recognize the different approaches to dealing with problems. This knowledge can help us build smoother relations between people with different approaches to problem solving. Although cats appear to perform most actions instinctively, they also seem to react to human behavior and adapt themselves to it. For instance, some cats behave as if they understood their owner's feelings. One cat owner told of the time when they lay crying and exhausted on her bed, and her cat put its front legs around her head and comforted her. Cats also sometimes appear to be able to understand the function of many of the things human beings use. For example, some cats, when they bring a captured bird or mouse into the house, put it on a plate or in a dish. There are also cats who know how to open a door by turning the handle. Furthermore, a lot of cats seem to understand what their owners say. A writer tells a story of her cat, who used to sleep on top of her word processor. At first, when the cat's tail got in the way of the screen, the owner would push its tail away and say, "Move your tail, please." Eventually, she didn't have to push the tail, but only had to tell the cat to move it. Children absorb parental worries, often without our even knowing it. It's worth becoming aware of how often we make statements beginning with the words, "I'm afraid," or "maybe it won't," or "I'm worried that." If children are routinely exposed to fearful comments, they are likely to develop an apprehensive attitude. Expectations are molded through repetition, and negative thinking can quickly become circular. We all know people who have become caught in this kind of negative situation. I expect the worst, and the worst always seems to happen to me. Unfortunately, today's parents have more serious fears for their children than ever before. We face the problem of figuring out how to protect and warn our children against danger without causing unnecessary anxiety in them. For example, we want our children to be cautious with strangers, but not to assume that every person they don't know is hostile or out to do them harm. We want them to stay in our eyesight, but not feel at risk if we aren't by their side. It's a challenge to raise their self-confident kids and at the same time do our best to keep them out of harm's way. English is a language with an enormous number of words, but how many English words are there? Most dictionaries used by college students have about 200,000 words, while most full-length dictionaries have about 300,000 to 600,000. Meanwhile, an organization called the Global Language Monitor positively claims that there are exactly 988,968 English words. But counting the number of words in English is not an easy task. First of all, many words that we use in English today were originally words in other languages. Should the words sushi or tsunami be considered English words now that they are frequently used? Then there is the question of words that were used a century ago but are no longer used today. Should they be counted too? What about words that are only used in certain regions of a country? And the list of questions goes on. Should we count the verb, the adjective, the noun, and other forms of a word as separate words? In other words, would drive, driving, and driver be counted as separate words? Should the compound word be counted as one word, and should each of the words in it be counted separately? How about the huge number of technical and scientific terms? Finally, to add to the difficulties of counting words, we need to consider new words that are being created all the time. The constantly changing nature of language is frustrating for anyone trying to count words. But this is also what makes language so interesting. English, like other languages, always offers something new to learn. There is much debate on the origin of the game of football. The Japanese and Chinese claim to have invented a sport similar to modern soccer many centuries ago. Both established in roughly 1004 BC, Kemari and its Chinese version Tsuchi vie for position as the oldest soccer-like sport. In comparison to modern soccer, the Japanese game of Kemari was a game that used a large ball stuffed with sawdust. This version used a field, which was set up by choosing 4 trees. These trees were usually cherry, maple, pine, and willow. Many large houses in Japan would grow these trees to make a field for Kemari. Kemari was normally played with 2 to 12 players. China's version Tsuchu involved the players hitting a leather stuffed ball into a small hole. As in soccer, no player could use his hands during play. It was considered an honor to be part of a team. The first international soccer or Tsuchu match is believed to have been held in China around 50 BC. The emperor of the Han Dynasty was an avid early player and fan of Tsuchu. This spread the popularity of Tsuchu all over China. Some people in China claim that it is even possible Tsuchu could go back to 5000 BC. The British claim that soccer was created in the 8th century in Britain. It was not a recreational sport at the time, but a war game. It was a violent game and serious injury and even death were not uncommon. It was not until 1815 when the Eton College set up a series of rules for the game that it became less violent sport. At the time, the colleges began to play using similar rules. In 1848, the rules were set by Cambridge University. In the Cambridge rules, shin kicking and carrying the ball were forbidden. This is where rugby and soccer developed into 2 different sports. The past 30 to 40 years have seen a huge increase in the number of children who suffer from allergies, and scientists are still looking for the explanation. Some have blamed increased air pollution, but it has also been found that allergies are common not only among children in the city, but also among children in the countryside, where pollution is typically much lower. A currently popular explanation for the rising allergies is the so-called hygiene hypothesis. The basic idea is that young children brought up in the environment which is too clean are more at risk of developing allergies. Nowadays, people bathe and wash their clothes more frequently than in the past, and thanks to vacuum cleaners, homes are less dusty too. One result of all these changes is that in their early lives, children are exposed to fewer allergens, substances that can cause allergies. This means that their bodies cannot build up natural immunity to them. Simply put, exposure to allergy-causing substances is necessary for natural protection against them to develop. The trend towards smaller families also means that young children encounter fewer allergens in the home. In fact, it is known that children who have older brothers and sisters are more resistant to allergies. The same is true of children who share their home with a pet. Such children are much less likely to develop the very common allergy to cat or dog hair, for example. Scientists agree that being exposed to a wide range of allergens early in life helps children to develop greater immunity. There is, however, also some data suggesting the genetics, family income, and even the parents' level of education may play a part in how likely your child is to suffer from allergies. Thus, although the hygiene hypothesis is an important area for research, we cannot yet be sure that too much attention to cleanliness is the only explanation for the enormous rise in the number of allergy victims. When we watch kittens and puppies playing, we realize that through play they are learning how to live. They learn various physical skills, such as how to jump over barriers without getting hurt. They also learn social interaction, for example. Interaction. For example, if a kitten bites his sister too hard, she will get angry and bite him back. These physical and social skills form part of the training that young animals need in order to grow up. Just as kittens and puppies learn about how to live through play, so do children. But in present-day Japan, especially in cities, there is not much space for children to play in. Children need to release their energy for their mental and physical health. They need space, especially outdoors, so that they can run, jump, and yell. Another point to consider is how much time children have to play. Some people say that 4 to 5 hours a day of playing outdoors with others is necessary. Even for 12-year-olds, it is very doubtful. However, whether any Japanese children get that much free time. Concerned about their future in an increasingly competitive society, parents generally tell their children to study more. Very few would tell them to go out and play. What do these children do at home when they are not studying? They tend to spend time by themselves. They play video games or watch TV, for instance. These activities do not teach them how to get along with others. This can only be learned through playing with other children. They need to play without being told what to do by adults in order to learn about leadership and group harmony on their own. Outdoor space is particularly suitable for this purpose. Children need a proper outdoor environment where they can freely spend their time playing with friends. A basic rule of medical science is that no human life should be used for the benefit of another. Some people are against human cloning and related techniques for this reason. In cloning, an egg cell is used to develop ordinary cells. The opponents of cloning insist that this is killing because it destroys the potential of the egg to develop into a human being. Other people oppose cloning because at this stage it is unreliable. In animal experiments, for example, success rates are very low. Still, others are concerned about the future that clone might bring about. They are afraid that cloning will lead to the production of human beings for body parts. They also fear that cloning might lead to attempts to create superior humans. Not everyone is against human cloning. However, some people support cloning if it is for the purpose of medical treatment, although they oppose the cloning of babies. The medical benefits of cloning and related techniques, they argue, could be huge. For example, if a heart can be developed from a patient's own cell, the body will not reject it. Furthermore, he or she will not have to wait for someone to die to get a new heart. Supporters claim that the use of such techniques is not killing, just as ordinary store-bought eggs do not develop into chickens. The eggs used for cloning do not develop into human beings by themselves. They also argue that it is already practically impossible to stop a patient from receiving medical treatment that in some way depends on cloning and related techniques. Even if one country bans cloning, there will always be another country that promotes it. The supporters, therefore, maintain that scientists should have the freedom. Maintain that scientists should have the freedom to experiment and that people should have the freedom to seek life-saving treatments. In other words, they feel that cloning should be continued unless it is clearly shown to be harmful. The debate over this issue is likely to go on for some time. Why is it that many people who have suffered a major shock, such as divorce or the death of a family member, seem to be weaker against a variety of major and minor illnesses? One common idea among psychologists has been that people could deal with suffering more effectively if they were able to understand it and accept it. Indeed, many experts emphasize the value of expressing thoughts and feelings associated with upsetting events. Recently, a team of medical researchers investigated the links between describing psychologically painful events and long-term health. In one experiment, healthy college students were asked to write about either personal disturbing experiences or ordinary topics over a period of 4 days. In the months afterwards, students who had chosen to reveal their inner thoughts and feelings in their writing visited the health center for illness much less often than those who had written about everyday topics. In an experiment that followed, another group of healthy students were given the 4-day writing exercise. Some chose to write about highly personal and upsetting experiences, including loneliness, problems with family and friends, and death. When questioned immediately afterwards, they stated that they did not feel any better. However, their blood samples taken before and after the experiment showed evidence of an improved resistance to illness. The white cells that fight off bacteria and viruses had increased their reaction and sensitivity to those invaders. This trend continued over the following 6 weeks. When another blood sample was taken, individuals who showed the best results were those who wrote about topics that they had actively refrained from telling others about. The researchers proposed that failure to face up to painful experience can be a form of stress itself and can increase the possibility of illness. It follows then that actively dealing with a major shock makes possible its understanding and acceptance. The answer is not to suffer in silence. It may not always be possible to talk about personal problems, but writing them down will help the body to fight disease in the long run. When it comes to eating, the United States has a lesson to learn from France. I'm not talking about the kinds of elaborate dinners Americans often associate with the French. Many of the meals the French eat are quick and simple. The difference is that the French eat together. They have managed to preserve a tradition that is good for everyone's health, the family meal. According to the French government's Committee for Health Education, 75% of French eat dinner together as a family, and many French school children still go home for lunch. These figures haven't changed much in decades. In the United States, on the other hand, national studies show that on average, only one family in 3 sits down for dinner together on a daily basis. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a steady decline in the number of American families that eat together regularly. It looks like the family meal is disappearing. How and why did the family meal start to disappear in the United States? My friends in the United States have various explanations why meals together aren't an option for their families. Parents and children lead hectic lives and lead hectic lives, and there just isn't time for a sit-down meal. Kids' sports schedules run on into dinner hour. After a long day at work, parents are too tired to cook. Teenagers are off on their own after school. Everyone likes different foods, they say. So what is the point of eating together? Yet study after study shows that having meals together as a family is good for both adults and children. A University of Michigan study found that mealtime at home was the single strongest factor predicting better achievement scores and fewer behavioral problems with children. Mealtime was far more powerful than time spent in school, studying, worshiping, playing sports, or doing arts activities. Other studies show that children like family meals. In one report, nearly 4/5 of adolescents cited eating dinner at home as one of their top-rated family activities. In a national YMCA poll in 2000, when teenagers were asked about their worries, 21% rated not having enough time with parents as their top concern. There is probably no nation where the citizens do not have at least some dissatisfaction with their society. There may be some nations where dissatisfaction does not come to the surface, but those nations cannot be called democracies. The World Youth Survey asks whether young people are satisfied with their own society and inquires about their awareness of social issues. The question asked was, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with your country? Respondents were asked to choose from the following: satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, or don't know. Some 35.7% of American youth replied that they were satisfied with their society. This ratio was markedly higher than that of other nations. America and Sweden were the only two nations where the combined response of satisfied and somewhat satisfied were in the majority. In these two countries, the percentages were slightly over 75%. 3 out of 4 young people in both nations were in one way or another satisfied. The responses among young people in Japan and Korea were quite similar to one another. Those who were satisfied accounted for 4.2% in Japan and 6.3% in Korea. Those who were somewhat satisfied came to 34.5% and 39.2% respectively. The country with the largest number of dissatisfied respondents was Germany. Close to 30% of young people there shared this opinion. Combined with the somewhat dissatisfied group, they accounted for more than 65%. The survey also asked what problems their country faces. The top answer among Japanese and German youth was, it is difficult to find a job and many people are unemployed. The top answer in the US and Sweden was people are discriminated against by race. The top answer in Korea was there are gaps in income and occupation among people with different educational backgrounds. The responses of these young people could seem to accurately reflect the issues that those nations are confronting. A society in which everyone can live happily may be called a utopia. However, a utopia is no more than an ideal society within the imagination. Furthermore, the Greek root of the word means nowhere, a place that does not exist. And yet, the possession of the sensibility that can imagine a world where everyone is happy is a special privilege of young people alone. Beware of those who deliberately use aspects of the truth to deceive you and others. When someone tells you something that is true but intentionally leaves out important information that should be included for full comprehension on your part to take place, they can create a false impression. For example, an acquaintance might tell you, "I just won $100 in the state lottery and it was fantastic when I took that $1 ticket back to the store and turned it in for $100. This woman's winner, right? Maybe not. In fact, you later learn that she had purchased not one ticket but instead 200 for this specific lottery, and only one of these are winner. Eventually, you realize this woman, who you thought was lucky or fortunate, is in fact a huge loser. Although she didn't say anything false, she clearly left out important information and likely did so on purpose. That's called a half-truth, which is not technically a lie, but it's just as dishonest." Untrustworthy candidates in political campaigns often use such deceptive communication strategies to trick voters into supporting them. Let's say that during Governor Smith's last term, her state lost 1 million jobs but gained 3 million new ones. Then she seeks another term in office and enters the election race. One of her opponents in that race subsequently begins a multimedia advertising campaign saying, "During Governor Smith's term, the state lost 1 million jobs. That is indeed true, but at the same time it is intentionally deceptive." A more honest statement from her opponent would have been, "During Governor Smith's term, the state had a net gain of 2 million jobs." Advertisers sometimes use half-truth as well, because it's illegal in many countries to openly make false claims about a product or service. Some advertisers try to mislead you with the truth. An ad might consequently boast, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend yaki pills to cure nose pimples. This is also a factual statement, but one which deliberately fails to mention that only 10 doctors fails to mention that only 10 doctors were asked about yaki pills, and 9 of these actually work for the Yaki Corporation. No one knows better than your mother, right? But does she know how much underwear you own? Jack International does. Or the number of ice cubes you put in a glass. Coca-Cola knows that we put 3.2 ice cubes in a glass and prefer cans to pop out of vending machines at the temperature of 2 degrees. Which potato chips do you usually eat first, the broken ones or the whole ones? Try asking a big snack maker. Big companies know the what, where, how, and when of their consumers' wants and demands. They figure out all sorts of things about us that we don't even know ourselves. Most companies research us in detail and collect mountains of facts about our buying habits and preferences. Did you know that 51% of all males pull their left pants leg on first, whereas 65% of women start with the right leg? Nothing about her behavior is sacred. A study showed that 68% of consumers prefer their toilet paper to unwind over the spool rather than under. But Americans are not always easy to figure out. A few years ago, Campbell Soup gave up trying to learn our opinions about the ideal size meatball after a series of tests showed that we prefer one so big it wouldn't fit in the can. In fact, almost everything we swallow is closely monitored by someone. Each year, we consume 156 hamburgers, 95 hot dogs, 283 eggs, 5 pounds of yogurt, 9 pounds of cereal, and 2 pounds of peanut butter. We spend 90 minutes a day munching it. Of all businesses, however, the prize for research thoroughness may go to toothpaste makers. Among other things, they know that our favorite toothbrush color is blue and that only 37% of us are using one that's more than 6 months old. About 47% of us put water on our brush before we apply the paste. 15% put water on after the paste. 24% do both, and 14% don't wet the brush at all. Thus, most big companies have answers to all the what, where, when, and how questions about their consumer demand. But to affect demand, companies need the answer to one more question. They need to know what causes us to want the things we buy. That's a much harder question to answer. As a young boy, I was always aware that what people said was, as a young boy, I was always aware that what people said was not always what they really meant or felt. I also knew that it was possible to get others to do what I wanted if I read their real feelings and responded appropriately to their needs. At the age of 11, I began my sales career by selling rubber sponges from door to door after school to make pocket money. I quickly figured out how to tell if someone was likely to buy from me or not. When I knocked on the door, if someone told me to go away but their hands were open and they showed their palms, I knew it was safe to keep trying. No matter how negative they may have sounded, their open hands showed me that they weren't aggressive. On the other hand, if someone told me to go away in a soft voice but used a pointer finger or closed hand, I knew it was time to leave. As a teenager, I became a magazine salesperson, selling at night. My ability to read people's body language earned me enough money to buy my first house. I joined the life insurance business at the age of 20 and went on to break several sales records at my company. I became the youngest person to sell over $1 million worth of businesses in my first year. It turned out that the techniques I had learned as a boy in reading body language through my experience in selling sponges and magazines were directly related to the success I could have in any situation involving people. Most researchers now agree that words are used mainly for giving information, while body language is used for communicating attitudes and feelings. In some cases, however, body language can be used as a substitute for verbal messages. Reading body language is a skill that can be learned because in any culture, words and body movements occur together in highly predictable patterns. Thus, a well-trained person can tell what movement someone is making simply by listening to what he or she is saying. A person who is trained to read body language can also guess which country someone is from just by watching his or her gestures. Touching is the language of physical intimacy. Because of this, touch can be the most powerful of all the communication channels. In May 1985, Bridget Gurney was trapped for 6 hours beneath a collapsed construction crane in New York City. Throughout her ordeal, she held the hand of a rescue worker who stayed by her side as heavy machinery removed the tons of twisted steel from her crushed legs. A stranger's touch gave her hope and the will to live. Touch appears to affect the sexes differently. Women sometimes react much more favorably to touch than men. In an interesting study, psychologists asked a group of nurses to lightly touch a patient once or twice shortly before the patient underwent surgery. The touching produced strongly positive reaction, but only among women. It appeared to lower their blood pressure and anxiety levels, both before and after surgery. For men, however, the touching proved to be very upsetting. Their blood pressure and anxiety levels both rose. The psychologists suspect that because men are taught to be more stoic, that is, to hide their feelings and to ignore their fears. Touching rattled them by reminding them that life is fragile. How do you feel about touching and being touched? Salespeople think they know. Research shows that it is harder to say no to someone who touches you when making requests. But not everyone is happy about being touched by a stranger. Think about your own comfort level when you find yourself in a crowd. Are you relaxed and loose, or does physical contact make you feel awkward and tense? In some situations, we can't help touching each other. Take a crowded elevator, for instance. Normally, people stand shoulder to shoulder and aren't accepting such close contact without complaint. The rules seem to be touch only from shoulder to elbow, but nowhere else. Even though the Japanese are regarded as a non-touching society, the crowded cities force them to be jumped into subways and trains. Edward T. Hall, an anthropologist, says the Japanese handle their uneasiness about being packed into public places by avoiding eye contact and drawing within themselves emotionally. Thus, touching without feelings. Thus, touching without feeling.